What is your
Sure,
initial
my pleasure.
reaction to this, as I say, fairly bold plan, I think it's quite fair to say?
I think it's notable in two ways. I mean, the most important is that they want to pass it through the Senate in regular order. They're not appealing to these special procedures to get it through on just Democratic votes. And President-elect Biden is willing to negotiate with Republicans to see what it takes to get to 60. That's a real change. The past 4 years, we have not seen a president engaged in the legislative process, and I think that'll be very interesting. On the substance, I don't think there are any surprises here. These are all things that the Democrats have had on their wish list. Some of them Republicans have shown an appetite for, the checks notably in the past month. And we'll see what can stick and what just won't make it over the finish line.
So, Doug, you made a very important point. They're doing it in regular order. They're willing to negotiate.
Yep.
This is an opening bid, it strikes me. This is not where they think they're
Right.
going to end up.
I think that's exactly right. I think it'd be a big surprise if they got exactly what they wanted on the state and local government. It's been very controversial. And I'll be interested to see if, we see the Republicans come back and ask again for some sort of business protection against tort and liability from the virus. So we'll see where this goes, but this is an opening bid. Some of this, I think, will be easily agreed to. A better vaccine distribution process is a national priority. I don't see a big problem with that. Some of it's going to be a bit tougher.
Doug, is it what is needed? Is it what the economy needs? Obviously, some of this is badly needed, but is all of it? For example, the grossing up to $2,000, the extra $1,400. We've had various people like Larry Summers, for example, former Treasury Secretary, who somewhat controversially said that's not what we need right now. In fact, a lot of people have a lot of money, they just can't spend it.
Yeah, I'm with Larry on that one. It's my least favorite part of this proposal. If indeed it is intended as stimulus, that it's not going to work because we can't get the economy to function in the presence of the virus. If it's intended as relief for those who had real financial distress, it's not very well targeted. And so it's neither fish nor fowl, and I think doesn't serve a great economic purpose. Sort of how you think about some of these other components really depends on how you think about this as stimulus or relief. If we believe there will be continued distress from the virus through the spring, it makes sense to extend the unemployment insurance benefits for another 3 months. If you believe that the virus will largely be contained, labor markets can work effectively, that makes less sense. So I think there's going to have to be some sort of discussion about their vision for how the public health and the economy play out over the next 6 months to make the case for this package.
Doug, it's great to see you. But is it fair to say, though, that maybe one of the most important parts of this package is the $160 billion going towards testing for the virus, going towards vaccine distribution? Because another former, Obama official, Austin Goolsbee, who's now at Booth School of Business in University of Chicago, says, if you don't get the virus under control, your stimulus is just going to kind of keep washing away. Do you agree with that? Is this kind of maybe the heart for the beginning of the package, at least?
Yes, I completely agree with that. We have big supply constraints on the economy. We have a big chunk of economic activity, which is high-income individuals spending on services that's just missing, and it's not going to come back until the virus is controlled. So if you really want a fully functioning U.S. economy, you have to deal with the virus. That component's very important. And I think as important as the money is the fact that the President of the United States will own the distribution and implementation of the vaccine. That kind of presidential ownership, leadership, bully pulpit is essential for success on big national measures.
Doug, it's Heidi just chiming in from Sydney. You know, one of the other pieces as I look through the components of this proposal, the $350 billion for state and local governments, that's going to be controversial, right? Because Republicans will say this is just a bailout for mismanaged local government budgets. What could be the trade-off here to get this part through?
Well, I think that Republicans keep pointing to the fact that it's not really been terrible on state and local finances. We've seen income taxes hold up pretty well. Property values have held up, so property taxes have done well. A lot of the stimulus money that went into the Paycheck Protection and other programs showed up as taxable income at the local level. And the piece of the economy that has declined, those sales of services, is not a particularly heavily taxed part of the economy. And so revenues have held up better than expected. The states that are really having trouble are states that relied on tourism and just aren't seeing that kind of revenue come in. So I imagine there's going to be some negotiation over this, but there are two other places you can put money to help the states that really need it. One is in the vaccine distribution. We've had a lot of states say, look, we've got a plan, but we can't execute on it because we don't have the money. And so you can give states help, give it in the vaccines, and it's fungible elsewhere. And the second one, where there is no dispute, there's an enormous amount of distress, are in these state local transit systems, subway systems, bus systems. The ridership's just gone, and there's an enormous financial hole there. And there's money in there in this package for that. That's another place to help out.
So this is a big package, a bold package. Some of it we knew was going to be a component of it, right? But it's interesting, as you mentioned at the top, this is not going to go through the reconciliation process. If he needs the 60 Senate votes, is there a chance that you take a look at this in its entirety and think it's overreach here, that it's perhaps less prudent than what he should have gone for?
Well, I think the proposal itself reflects not just the opening bid nature of it, but also the experience of a lot of the people who are staffing what will be the Biden administration, who are in the Obama administration. They feel that they didn't ask enough early, and so they don't want to make that mistake again. As far as the tactics, I think that it's important for the president to try regular order and to give Congress a chance to find a way to get to middle ground and to do its job effectively. It may be the case that they want to come back and pass some more using the special reconciliation procedures. If so, everything I'm hearing says that they're going to do that, but they're also going to pay for it. Now, you or I might not like the pay fors, higher corporate taxes, higher taxes in general, but it's a real change in the atmosphere in this town for an administration to talk about paying for its proposals.
Doug, what has a $15 minimum federal wage got to do with it, so to speak? I mean, it might be a good idea or a bad idea, but the whole idea was to have this targeted specifically to COVID-19 and the direct aftermath. And that's the sort of thing that the Republicans, and by the way, some moderate Democrats, the likes of Joe Manchin from West Virginia, really get they get their hackles up about that. They say that's not got anything to do with it. Whether it's good or bad, it doesn't belong in here.
I don't think it belongs in here. It's not stimulus, it's not relief. It gets in the way of recovery in the labor market. And so I expect that to drop out. Whether it's strategically put in so that they have something to drop out, who knows what the thinking is. But it's certainly something that the president wants to demonstrate to his far left that he cares about. That's a big issue for them.
So, Doug, in terms of this whole question of how long this lasts, what do we assume here? What do we know about how this will be written? Because I think we've all mentioned, in fact, you said it, if the virus suddenly is diminishing because vaccines are going quickly, then you say maybe we don't need stimulus now. How do the sides agree on some plan to make that part of it work?
Well, I think there are pieces of it that it's really important to take a close look at. So, for example, my understanding is there is a provision to extend paid family leave. And is that something that's permanent? Does it extend to the end of the declaration of a health emergency? Is it 3 months, 6 months? One of the things that has been, I think, quite remarkable about this episode is that Congress has responded on a large scale to the problems that the economy has faced, but it has not added new permanent programs. And so once this spending washes through, the federal budget goes roughly back to its baseline spending and revenue levels. If you start adding big new permanent obligations in the midst of this, I think that's going to be a very contentious issue. And trying to steer clear of that, I think, is pretty important. In terms of, is it 3, 6, 9 months? I don't think anyone really knows. And I think you're going to see the president and his team erring on the side of being generous. And we'll see just how far the Congress is willing to go with them.
David called this what looks like an opening bid as he brought you into the show. You said, yes, some parts will be a bit tougher. Where do you expect this to end up? What gets dropped? Where do you think this package actually concludes?
Boy, I really wish I actually knew the answer to that question, because that means I would understand the politics of the House, the Senate, and the next administration. So I don't know the answer. I think what's hardest to answer is, suppose you take state and local government aid. I think some ends up in there. What's the number? Very hard to say. There are some things I think drop out. I don't think a $15 minimum wage gets you there. I'm not convinced the $2,000 top-up for the checks makes it over to the finish line, given objections within the Democrats themselves. So there are some questionable items, but there's some core items where you do think that they'll go through. The vaccines have to, the transit aid I think has to. There are pieces that will definitely be in there and will stay in there.
You don't have a crystal ball for us, Doug? That's really disappointing. This is part one of two, right? Because we're expecting some of the bigger picture items to be addressed in a second proposal later on down the track: healthcare, climate, infrastructure. I mean, those are the longer term things that are going to have a real enduring impact. What do you expect to see in that second package?
Well, what's interesting about the second package is that it has been advertised as the place you do long-term things: infrastructure, clean energy and climate in particular, whatever pieces of healthcare that they want to take on. But it has also been advertised as the thing that they use, so-called reconciliation, these special procedures that get you a 50-vote threshold in the Senate. Those procedures do not allow you to create law from whole cloth. They allow you to raise taxes, lower taxes, raise spending, lower spending, using existing programs. And some of the things they want to do are not existing programs. And so that becomes a very, very tough squeeze as you try to put more money into something and then use it for a new purpose. And Republicans object, and it gets tossed out of the procedures. And that's for that reason, that's a harder piece of legislation to pass, even though the threshold's at 50. And it's a slow process. So that will take some time. This they want to do fast. That's why they've chosen to go the way they went.
Well, talk about that fast. Talk about the timeline here as a practical matter. This looks like a very big, complicated proposal. As you know, it'll take us some time just to get it written up, much less through committee. There also happens to be something going on called impeachment, with a trial in the Senate. As you look at the first 100 days, we're shooting at a moving target of COVID-19. As of April 1, who knows what that pandemic is going to look like? How does that timing work for this administration? Because if it takes 3 months, 4 months to get it done, it may be beside the point largely at that point.
I think that assumes that we have an effective vaccination distribution and that we're approaching herd immunity, and we feel good about the outlook for the public health mission. But if, as we delay actual implementation of this, that doesn't happen, the urgency rises. It becomes much more important to get the vaccine aid out there. It might be more important to give people continued support in the presence of an economy that is shut down by a virus. And so I think the key really remains the public health mission and having some success on that. And that's really where we are right now. We had a big spike in the spring. We're experiencing a very big spike now. And in many ways, they are faced with the same problem Congress faced, in March of 2020. And there was a lot of uncertainty then. We face it again.
Well, Doug, you've worked for Republicans in the past. When you left that part of your career, you founded the American Action Forum as a bipartisan group. So when you read the mood in Washington for us, I know you said, you wish you could figure out the politics, but you know a lot of people. You talk to a lot of people. This hope, this idea that maybe there's more of a willingness now for the two sides to work together. You said how interesting for a president to come in ready to negotiate. Has the mood shifted? Are more people on both sides willing to really sit down and get something done?
Yes and no. At the moment, the town remains bitterly divided, and quite frankly, emotions are completely frayed, and a lot of people are walking around very distressed. And that's not a great environment for something like this. But bipartisanship begins in the White House because it's the only place that has the leverage to go to the other side and say, we know what's important to you, we'll make sure it's in. They have to go to their own side and say, we get it, we're disappointing you, but we need this vote, and we'll help you out some other way. If you don't have a president who's willing to do that, we've been with the president like that, you don't get important legislation through in regular order. It just does not happen. So it begins with the White House. They're going to try. These are going to be old muscles that have to be renewed in the Congress. People have to relearn how to do this, and I think it's going to be very interesting to watch.
Doug, just before we let you go, talk to me about how you think the funding, how we're going to pay for this, right? Because we know we've heard from a Biden official that they won't be using offsets. This will come from federal borrowing, with the idea that, in the middle of this sort of unprecedented pandemic and economic slowdown, now's not the time to worry about widening budget deficits. Is this prudent as a way forward? Sort of this we buy now and pay later, or worry about it later sort of thing?
I think my sentiment is shared by most economists who've looked at this, which is that all of the things that are being done to genuinely address the coronavirus itself and the fallout of the pandemic it is absolutely appropriate to borrow, and we shouldn't regret any dime of that. Doing things that have nothing to do that and borrowing the money, that's a concern. And so that's where this package enters. When you scrutinize it, do you really think everything in there is needed to combat the fallout of the coronavirus? If so, then we will borrow it. We will have a stronger economy, which is the first step to having the federal budget recover. And then there will be real work in the years to come. And we will exit this episode with the highest level of debt relative to GDP. We will have lower interest rates than we might otherwise have had, but we will still have interest costs as a fraction of GDP rising as far as the eye can see. And that's not sustainable, and at some point has to be checked. That's a minimum condition for a sovereign nation. And the U.S. hasn't done it in the 21st century. So there is some real work left to be done, even if we say we don't have to worry about it right now. It's still out there.